You're listening to Tech Me Seriously with Sarah Tenisi, CEO of TenisiTech. Candid conversations with driven technology and business professionals who've always got something interesting to say.
Hi, I'm Sarah Tenisi, the host of Tech Me Seriously and CEO of TenisiTech, an IT services firm headquartered in California. Today, I am thrilled to be bringing it back in-house and speaking with Bryan Bansbach, who is our Director of Infrastructure Operations. Bryan has been instrumental in operationalizing our IT practices by building standard, repeatable processes that keep our clients productive and secure. He's been working with technology for the better part of 20 years, and it's just been a huge game changer to have him on board. So welcome, Bryan.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm excited and, a little nervous to be here, but I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Your nerves will go away momentarily. So this is really fun for me. It's because you're on the team, and it was just kind of this year that I thought, why aren't I talking to my IT professionals, in my community, in my company even? And so I'm really excited to do that. The other thing that I think is particularly fun about this conversation is that I sort of consider this almost as a part two of a conversation I had last month with Josie Haynes about her experience working with leaders who are trying to figure out how to leverage AI for themselves and also for their technical teams. And just by virtue of conversations we've been having at TenisiTech, that everybody's really hot on this. And I love your take on it. So I feel like yours is kind of the perfect sort of add-on to this conversation I had with her. So today we're going to talk about the very broad topic of digital transformation, automation, AI, and security. So Bryan, when I kind of throw that topic out there, and I don't even know, to be fair, if I told you what the whole title was, but why do you think we're talking about this today, just based on the conversations we've had before?
Yeah, I think obviously every business is looking to stay on top of this wave of AI. And so many people, businesses, they all feel like they're going to be left behind if they don't do something to stay on top of this wave. And I think, like many trends, there's definitely a piece of it where, yeah, we do have to stay on top of it. This is a big game changer. But there's also we need to take a step back and figure out what our actual goals are with these things and not just look to throw tool after tool after tool and hope that it solves some problem that we don't necessarily know that we're solving.
And even problems that maybe we're not even aware we have. Like when I said, so for anybody listening, this is kind of how it went with Bryan. Hey, we got to figure out how to automate all of our work, not to get rid of people, just to make our current people less stressed and more productive, I guess I would say. And when do we get to start offering services to companies? And that was kind of my thing a few months ago. And I think rightfully so, you were like, hang on. And I think that that's part of how we end up here. Because and you kind of mentioned this, not even identifying what we're going for. This is one of the things Josie said. She's like, it's like everybody forgot how to roll something out, right? Like traditional rollout is business plan and project plan and milestones and all the stuff that we already know how to do. But it seems like all that went out the window with AI.
I think there's so much of the fear of missing out, the FOMO.
Yeah.
AI is moving so quickly that it feels like if we're not doing something right this moment to move that needle in the right direction, that something's going to change in 5 minutes, as it does, and our competitors are going to leave us behind.
Right.
But I think that what we're seeing is, so many of these companies are just struggling to find really good ways to implement AI. And I think that we just need to take a step back and understand where AI fits into the picture rather than it being the answer to all of our problems.
Exactly. I mean, right. And that was kind of the other thing that I think I've been concerned about, and I know you share this concern, is that everybody across the world probably went out and downloaded their favorite AI tools, right? No exception with TenisiTech. Everybody has their favorite tools. I think yours is Claude. I'm still doing a lot of the large language model stuff, like with ChatGPT. But everybody went and downloaded this. No company that, at least I think that we've worked with or potentially ourselves, have really put the thought into what are our guardrails for using this within our company. And there are things like CASB tools that could block some of this stuff. I don't know that we're doing any blocking ourselves. And I feel like that's where the main security concern comes into play.
Yeah, I think a lot of that comes down to the level of access and the level of training that you might be providing to staff. I mean, I think that we often hope, especially with a crew of largely technical people, almost exclusively technical people with TenisiTech, that there's a little bit more of a level of caution around the kind of information you're putting into these tools. Though, of course, that's often a bad assumption. You know, we should be training on this is how we should be using the tools. Here's better ways to use the tools. Here's maybe some of the ethics around using those tools. But I think where it really starts, and I went to a great leadership summit last week with a bunch of CIOs, CTOs, CISOs. And of course, 75% of the conversation had something to do with AI. And I think that probably the biggest takeaway that I got from it was just this idea of AI standardization. Start there. Get everybody on the same tools. Make sure that it's a business or an enterprise level tool. Make sure that everybody knows how to use it. And then make sure that that sensitive data is, well, hopefully staying out of those tools. You know, OpenAI says that when you're on their business products, they don't train on the data that you're putting in there, but there's a lot of trust that we're putting into a large organization not to be training on that data. And that's where the sort of leaks and challenges can come from. And, you know, am I putting sensitive customer information into this tool? Who knows where that might end up?
Well, and the other thing too is I think the jury is still out in terms of being able to articulate what the benefit has been. Like when I talked to Josie, she talked about development teams using it and introducing bugs kind of earlier in the process that are harder to find because they were written with AI. And so all of a sudden, all this time that you thought you saved in developing, you ended up spending in QA. And so timelines aren't even changing. And I thought that was kind of a light bulb moment for me. We're going to get into kind of how IT pros should be addressing all of this stuff. But before we get there, I wanted to just take a few minutes to talk about you and your IT journey. So tell us about like when you got started and kind of how it gets you to here.
Sure. That was one of those ones that kind of grew up with it. You know, we had computers in our house long before most households had computers. I don't even know how. Most of them were not good. And so if I wanted to play all the fun games that I had on my computers, I had to figure out how to fix them or had to figure out how to upgrade them. And, you know, I thought I was going to be a video game designer. And that just kind of went out the window when I figured out how much I can't sit still when doing programming and those sort of things. It just doesn't capture.
That's exactly me. I love it. I didn't know that we had that in common.
Yeah, I've tried so many times to get into development and I only get so far before I'm like, I just can't sit down that long and do this sort of thing. So straight out of high school, I started working at a CompUSA to date myself a little bit there because I don't think there are any left. And I like to say I faked it until I made it. You know, I worked a lot through computer repair places, worked for Dell, worked for Sony. And then I eventually came across the world that is the MSP as it was kind of budding from the old value-added reseller, you know, where it was just time and materials. He had some customers. It wasn't a lot of the monthly sort of consistent service. Moved around a bunch, you know, came from San Diego to Rhode Island, back to San Diego because, you know, New England winters are rough.
Terrible.
And, spent a lot of time in between MSPs from there. So I've been anywhere from service desk to sysadmin, senior sysadmin, sales engineer, whatever hat you normally can wear in an MSP I have. And over the past few years I think the lie that we often tell ourselves is that there are decisions that we make in life that are irreversible, you know? And so I think when you have a tendency towards leadership, but you are a doer, right? As an admin, you go, well, if I decide to lean into leadership, that's it.
Yes.
I have to go down that route and that's it. And of course, what a terrible rationalization. Of course, you can always go back. But a couple of years ago, I decided to really just lean into leadership and felt like, hey, I can be a whole lot more effective with a team than just me. And so that's where we are today.
And we're having such a good time. I feel like we're
So much fun.
reaping the benefit of that decision for sure. So in the context of maybe AI or maybe just generally, if it isn't like an AI related answer, what do you think as an IT ops leader makes your job the most challenging in like this MSP setting?
It's the reason that it's so fun is the ever constant change.
Mm-hmm.
Staying on top of change in the industry, it's tough.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the few places where I think you're just constantly getting your hands around something and then something changes. Some new tool comes out. Of course, MSP space a few years ago really was flying under the radar when it came to really being a known industry, and then it really became known, and now you have a lot of private equity and venture funds, those sort of things. So
Mm-hmm.
lots and lots and lots of new businesses with new tools popping up to sell to the MSP space. And so, yeah, it's just finding that sweet spot where you have everything that you need. You can stay on top of management, you can stay on top of security, and you can provide the best service that you can to your customers. Because, I kind of grew up in this world of, at the end of the day, we're a customer service company that happens to
100%.
provide IT.
That's right.
That's where we are.
Exactly. And I love this kind of idea of having to stay up to date. In fact, I think that's part of why MSPs for me, and obviously I'm going to say this at this point, but I was one of those people that didn't realize. So we're coming up on our 14th birthday in January. So 14 years ago, did not really even understand the concept of MSP, even though I started one. And also, when I did start to understand the concept, I thought, no, 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 we're the non-MSP MSP, because I think that there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way. And there's a lot, I mean, just like you said, there's so much changing all the time that it can be hard to land on what is the right way. And I feel like that's part of why it's been so fun having you on the team, because I think you have this operationalization mindset where it's like, hey, how are we going to make this easy for us, but also for our customers? And I think that kind of shows like this ability to look at different tools. I also think that's why companies should hire MSPs. We have so much practice on a regular basis. So one of the things I really wanted to spend the bulk of our time on today is like, how should IT pros be addressing? And what I started to say, at least in our conversations, is really, I feel like we're talking about digital transformation still, right? This was like the big term 15 years ago, and nobody really understood what it meant. IT people understood what it meant. But even getting companies to move on that digital transformation journey feels like something we today still spend tons of time on. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, is this really just digital transformation 2.0?
I think a large component of it is.
Mm-hmm.
I really think that I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I think that there's kind of two ways that we can look at the AI landscape right now. And I think where a lot of businesses are trying to go down the road is the sort of latter of the two. But I think the first is really this helper, right? It's the one where, I think a lot of executives are using it to help, write messaging and emails and those sort of things. I know where I've found a lot of benefit in it is in some of those operational tasks where it's like, hey, I need to put together a job description for something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if I can use the tool correctly, provide it the right context, get it to ask me a lot of questions, been able to really create very solid job descriptions that meet our needs. And so there's this kind of content generation piece, maybe help me answer some questions piece, the sort of replacement for search, right? Is what everybody's doing right now. And then there's the, okay, how can everybody in the business get the benefit of this tool? And I think that's where that digital transformation piece comes in. I think it really comes down to automation.
Yeah.
And, AI being a piece of that automation rather than this sort of silver bullet to solve all your problems. And to that point, I saw a great post the other day. I don't exactly recall who posted it, so I don't want to name drop anybody. But they made this great point. It was like, hey, especially if you're a small business, if you don't have good processes and procedures and you're trying to throw AI in on the top of this, you're really not doing it right. And I think the way I've been trying to think of it lately is even potentially seeing this tool as if it was like a new employee on your team. If you drop in a new employee on your team, can you just give them all your run books and your processes and they can learn it? Or do they have to sit with you for days shadowing how you do this thing because nobody documented it anywhere? If you're the other part, you're not ready for AI.
That's right. And that was kind of my thing when when the team was talking about kind of what the goals were over this next year, the light bulb for me was, wait, a lot of this is automation that, by the way, is maybe already in the tools. And I
Sure.
had been saying to clients, like, hey, AI is very exciting, but you're not going to have to come up with an AI way to do your jobs. You're going to leverage your vendors that provide your kind of core software packages. And they're the ones that are going to be writing all this AI into it. And then it was like, wait a minute, what are all the things that we're already not taking advantage of? And so when I looked at like our list of, things that we wanted to tackle, some of it was kind of already a feature that we just hadn't had the time really to kind of put in place. And I feel like that's happening to a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. We are where AI is not part of the tool. And, we're obviously seeing more and more of that
Yeah.
to varying levels of success, too. I think one of the more prominent examples of that, and, forgive me, Microsoft, but don't forgive me. I don't really care. Um, Copilot, right?
Yeah.
I think, Copilot is an open AI based tool. And yet, if you work with it a lot and you work with ChatGPT, you're going to go, this is not the same tool.
Hmm.
It's just not as effective as other tools. And so there's also that part of like, hey, how are these vendors implementing this? Is it half as good as, what you're getting with something like OpenAI? And then there's the piece in the middle of all this, which is like, hey, maybe there's some opportunity where I need different tools to talk to one another. And can I leverage AI as part of that automation workflow? We see a lot of this being called out as agentic AI, right?
Yes.
An AI agent
Yeah.
that can be the go-between to help you work between various data sets, Salesforce, your QuickBooks, maybe. Well, maybe not as much QuickBooks. There's some sensitive information, I'm sure,
Yeah.
in there, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
Disparate tools,
Yeah.
different kinds of data sets. Where can I use this thing in between to help me be more effective?
Well, and you just said one of the words, and so I want to kind of address this. Can we talk about kind of defining agentic AI versus like the large language model? Because I still feel like in the world, at least for non-technical people, they're all using the large language model stuff. That's the let's write job descriptions, let's have a conversation to help me process something, those types of things, which is
Mhm.
really cool. If you haven't done it, you should because it's interesting. But what's the agentic part of it? Because I think that's where we are doing a lot of our talking, at least as it pertains to automating.
So I think one of the more interesting early examples that seemed it was somewhere in the middle between far-fetched and actually possible. A little bit science fiction, but it was kind of this idea of like I have a travel agent
Hmm.
to, well, I don't, but might
Yeah.
somebody might have a
Yeah.
travel agent to book their travel. You could have an AI agent that is connected to Expedia, and you talk to this AI agent. And the whole explosion of why large language models are so great is because they can understand language so well, right? It's
Hmm. Hmm.
uncanny how much you can converse with one of these, tools and feel like you're talking to a person you never know. But you could have this agent that is connected to Expedia, and you could say, hey, I want to book travel for, to Europe next year at this time. And it's going to help you work through that process rather than you having to go to the site and do the search and do all this thing.
Hmm.
And then, of course, there's this concept of we could have multiple agents talking to one another,
Hmm.
which comes into, I've seen some very interesting examples of, like AI teams, especially in development, where you might have an agent that's a project manager, and then one
Hmm.
that's the developer, and then one's the QA, and they all effectively have specific jobs in this process, which helps them be more effective. And so that's kind of the concept around this agent is it's, still large language model, but it's something that does a very specific job. And then it might connect to a tool so that it can do that job, not just answer questions.
Hmm. I know. And it sounds so fun, but it sounds still a little far away. And I think it still is further away than people maybe think. At least of being a productive team member. This is I feel like I've come a little bit full circle on let's do it and then let's like hold off a little bit and see where we're going because at least in the context of our clients, and this is why I said like I feel like I'm still now talking a lot about digital transformation and automation. And that's what I think digital transformation really boiled down to is how do we really take paper processes, very manual processes, and automate them to some extent. And I think that that's what's funny is people think they're talking about AI, but really they're talking about automation. And so again, looking at our project plan, it's like, oh, wait a minute, this actually falls into an automation category. And I think that was something that you were really trying to drive home to the team. Can you talk about like the difference a little bit and kind of how you're thinking about this?
Sure. I mean, I can bring up an example that I'm sure my team is tired of me talking
Oh my God,
about.
I love it.
So, we've recently moved into a new ticketing system, one that
Hmm.
allows us to do a little bit more of what we need to do as an MSP. The ticketing system allows you to categorize tickets. It's really helpful for us to understand what kind of issues we're seeing so that we can take those trends and we can do something with those trends. And we can kind of come back to where AI can help with trends too. Most of the tickets that we get come in via email. And there's really no way to categorize that ticket easily. It comes in via email. So it's a very manual process for the technician working on that ticket to go in and set the category. The system can't require that they do that if it's an already created ticket. And so we've had a lot of where, there's no categorization. And so we have a workflow built that takes that ticket data, summary, and the description. We have an OpenAI instance in our Microsoft Azure, so it's private.
Hmm.
We pipe that information in there and we ask, OpenAI, say, hey, taking this information and given our list of categorization, make a best guess on what this category should be. And again, it's a guess. And I think that's an important thing we got to remember too, is that AI is not perfect. It likes to make
Hmm.
things up sometimes.
Hmm.
So you have
Yeah,
to
for
put it into
real.
processes. You don't mind it making it up every once in a while. Doesn't need to be
Right.
100%. And then it goes and it changes that ticket. So now all of our tickets have categorization, and now we can see trends where, hey, look, we get a lot of phishing tickets where it's not actually phishing. What extra automation can we put in on top of that, right? So it opens up new and different workflows. And I think because we're having AI make a decision in a workflow that's not critical, right? I don't
Hmm.
care that it's wrong every once in a while. Then it's okay, right? But if it
Hmm.
was a workflow where I'm, my biggest fear right now, and maybe someday this will change, but I grew up watching Terminator.
Yeah.
I don't want to let it do things for us that could be critical. I don't want it making
Hmm.
decisions on a server and making a change to a server, and then that server goes down, and now we're trying to explain to our customer why their server went down because
Yeah.
the AI made a poor decision.
And of course, it would be a production server that, hundreds of
Every time,
thousands of people care about, of
every
course.
time.
Yeah.
AWS. I mean,
Yeah.
they,
Yeah.
they haven't said exactly what it is, but most likely it was the fact, that they've been replacing so many developers with AI agents that caused half the internet to go down for a day and a half.
Right. And I think that's kind of the scary part of it too. I want to just go back to your example. I love this example because you didn't mention this, but you also thought about how much time it's taking each of our agents, our actual people agents, to open a ticket, to read the ticket, to categorize it, to, whatever, close it and get it ready for someone else, right? Just that it's almost like the very first part of triaging is to figure out what issue we're dealing with. And so you came up with a number of minutes, right? That this AI tool was, or this, this example was going to save people. And what was that again?
So we landed on 2 minutes,
2 minutes
just
per
because of the
ticket.
process per
Yeah.
ticket. Yeah,
Yeah.
2 minutes per ticket. Well, and so we get somewhere around 2,500 tickets a month.
Yeah.
And the tool that we're using to assist with the automation part of this workflow, again, the keyword being that automation, can track how often it runs. And so it's tallying up how many hours it's saving us each month to have this process running.
That is such a beautiful example because it's simple. And
Yeah,
like you and I were just talking about that. Like sometimes we need to keep it simple, right? That's like the whole thing. I don't think that's changing at all in business, right? Let's keep it simple, stupid. And like that just feels like a really big win for our team, even though, like you said, it's not critical. No one's gonna die if it's a printer issue and it got categorized as a network issue, for example. What do you also, and I guess the other thing that I'm thinking of too is this idea of vendors releasing, I guess, AI components. And I think the best example I have is like vendors releasing MCP servers. And I don't know if that's something that we should define more, but it's basically vendors packaging up all the stuff that you could ask the tool to do with an AI bot. Is that a good way to say that?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. What do you think the average person needs to be thinking about? The average, let's say COO, CIO, right? Your ops directors, your information security officers. What do you feel like they should be kind of thinking of when they're looking at their vendors versus internal process development? Or do you know what I mean? Tool development. Did that make sense? I was just
Sure.
like off the cuff on that. It was kind of came out funny.
So, the first thing that comes to mind, and this might not directly answer the question, but the first thing that comes to mind anytime that I'm seeing one of our vendors or another vendor is implementing AI is tell me about how you're securing this. Tell me
Hmm.
about how you're securing the data that we're giving you that's going into these tools. And most of them, especially the bigger ones, they'll have white papers, they'll have various different ways to show, hey, we're not using customer data to train these models. It's being kept separate. We're also, in the cases of some tools that might have access to sensitive data, we're stripping that data out before it goes into the AI. And so you're not presenting social security numbers, you're not presenting these sort of things. But I think that's a majorly important thing to do. And I think more and more companies are going to need to start doing this stuff anyway. I think we've been doing more and more audits or especially things around cybersecurity insurance where they're starting to ask like, hey, what's your vendor management process look like? And are you
Hmm.
asking them these kinds of questions? Are you making sure that they've, have their SOC 2 compliance if they, are hosting data or, any other compliances that are required for your industry to work with? And, they need to be able to give you that data. And I think the AI portion of this is going to be coming up more and more where we're going to be asking, what are your policies around customer data with your AI models, and how are you doing these things? And I think more and more companies that are really trying to leverage AI, they're building their own models to be able to keep this stuff as private as possible. But I think that's going to be the most important piece is data privacy.
I mean, when we talk about kind of vendor questionnaires and security audits, it sort of scares me in the context of a smaller company, right? You're like 30 to, let's say 30 to maybe 150, or maybe even just 100, right? Because I feel like that's a big part of what we do as part of our service is put around that kind of wrap our services in an IT management. We do everything with the thought of like CIO, right? And a lot of smaller companies are not doing what is in the cyber insurance questionnaires. They're not doing just kind of basic vendor management. And so as I start to think about that, like, are you even doing the basics? I start to think about security and permissions, like when you were kind of giving that answer. And I was like, oh my God, how many companies have we walked into that have shared passwords, that aren't strong passwords, that don't have MFA, that I mean, the list goes on, right? Or here's my favorite one, their file permissions. And again, it's funny, every time I think about file servers, I think I can't believe we're still talking about file servers, but we are still talking about those things, right? And so what if your file servers aren't permissioned properly and somebody's account has access to, everything? And that's where you see all the the crypto issues that whatever the crypto virus issues that you see. And like for me it's like I worry that the world is not ready for this. I worry that small businesses aren't ready for this, because vendor questionnaire to me is like 10 steps beyond what I was just talking about as your basic account security.
Yeah, and I think the world being ready for it, that's a bigger question. I go back to the Skynet thing, and I think too, a lot of the folks that are working on this stuff, they're all the younger generation that never watched Terminator. I ran across it at least once, and I told them, you have homework. You're gonna go watch Terminator and tell me why this is a bad idea.
Yeah.
In any case, putting the doom and gloom portion of it aside, and the world potentially not being ready for our customers, yeah, there's a lot of conversations that we've been having where again, I think most of our customers using Microsoft, there are valuable things you can do with Copilot, Microsoft's
Hmm.
AI product. But the thing that a lot of folks don't understand is that when you buy the license and assign the license for Microsoft 365, it immediately gives access to everything you have access to Copilot. In some cases, that might be okay, right? But if you're storing your data in Microsoft's cloud file services, SharePoint is the most
Mm-hmm.
common one,
Mm-hmm.
and you've not thought through your file permissions as much, or your data sensitivity labels, which is another way we
Mm-hmm.
can do
Oh
that,
my gosh. Yeah.
you may or may not be allowing folks access to sensitive files that you're not really intent on, right? It could
Yeah.
be a HR folder that you didn't recognize that somebody had access to some files in there, and they don't really know that they have access to it. But if they start querying Copilot for HR information and they happen to have access to that file, Copilot's going to give it to them. And
Mm-hmm.
so I really do think that a first step, at least before a mass rollout, I mean, we've talked to a couple customers where it was like, hey, the only person we're giving this to right now is the CEO. Okay, fine. Maybe we don't need to go crazy with, data protection. It's the CEO. They have access
Mm-hmm.
to most of that stuff anyway.
Right.
But as soon as you start giving it downstream to the rest of your teams, you really need to be paying attention to the kind of, file access that everybody has, because Copilot's going to have access to all that stuff.
Exactly. And I think that part, I mean, thank goodness for the people that are actually using a really good MSP who can kind of articulate things in this way. I just think about, the teams that we come across that have, implemented MFA, for example, but not forced it. So therefore, MFA is not actually active. So therefore, there's a phishing attack. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's still happening everywhere. And I think that's the part of it where I think, cart before horse, everyone. Like, we still need to go back and do these foundational things for our infrastructure before we start to open this up. And that's the part that I think is being overlooked, particularly when people are like, let me just go download my favorite tool. So when you think, okay, so you talked a little bit about this. So I want to talk about, okay, this is coming. We already know it. You gave a couple of examples of kind of good places to start. For example, like, let's have your CEO have access to all of this and have them play with it and see what they can come up with. Are you giving people, and I don't even know if it's something that's a good idea to talk about here necessarily, but like, are you giving people who have access maybe a cheat sheet of ask these questions and see what you come up with? I mean, that seems like an interesting case, test case, I guess.
No, I think that's a really good idea. I think where we've probably stopped a little short is just in the warning of
Hmm.
like, hey, you're gonna have access to all this stuff, but maybe
Hmm.
not necessarily the sort of like,
Try this.
do a little bit of a pen test on yourself. Like, can
Hmm.
you find information that you don't think you should have access to? Or if you have a trusted person in your company, you can also give access, and you don't care so much if they see some of that stuff and you go, hey, see if you can find some stuff you're not supposed to have access to. I think that's probably a really good idea to prepare yourself for that. But there's a lot of great ways and tools for Microsoft, especially, where you can go through and you can kind of start to see what those permissions look like. If you know that you have very sensitive folders, very sensitive files, you can use data classification where you can be more specific. So you can say, hey, in the HR example, maybe you've got a team of 5 people, but maybe only 2 people on that team should be able to access this one file that
Like
sits within the
background
general
checks, for
HR.
example.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So everybody has access to this folder, which means normally they'd have access to this file. And there's caveats to that. But I can then on top of that say, okay, from a data classification standpoint, I'm going to mark this as sensitive, and only these 2 people can have access to anything tagged sensitive.
Mhm.
And so now,
Mhm.
even though HR has access to where that file exists, they cannot open it.
And that would be like a good use of automating permissions to kind of
Certainly.
tighten it up the right way. I had this other thought literally just right now. So I don't know. Maybe we end up editing this out. But, there's like certain tools, like I mentioned this already, CASB services that I can't even think about. Is like Netscope a CASB company? I can't even remember because, okay, so let me just say what it stands for: Cloud Access Security Broker. And
Mm-hmm.
these tools were supposed to be implemented by companies. I think you've still needed to be using VPN, right, to tunnel traffic through your company on your endpoint. I hope that this starts to like make people see how complex this stuff can get, because I know that a lot of our clients don't use CASB services. I know also zero trust has been a really big thing, and we have lots of friends that work in zero trust, and we talk a lot about zero trust. But I don't know that we're implementing it the same way we've seen other companies outside of TenisiTech trying to implement it, like maybe bigger companies. But it feels like this could kind of be like the use of AI could be a good, it'll help like CASB and Zero Trust kind of have a resurgence like COVID did with the QR code. I don't know. Like, have you been thinking about some of those new tools that maybe will help eliminate some of the security risk?
Sure. And an aside, I still don't trust QR codes
I
really
love
ever.
it.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Well,
A
it's
little on
kind
the
of
paranoid
interesting,
side.
right? It's like when people give out thumb drives. We used to laugh
Yeah.
because our
Never putting one of
cards,
those in.
oh my gosh, is this one? No, I don't have one handy, but our business cards, though we haven't printed business cards in a really long time, they look like a thumb drive. And everybody
Uh-huh.
thought they were so cute and funny. And I was like, it's kind of ironic that we would give business cards out like this, because the last thing an IT person wants you to do is stick some random fob into your computer. So, I mean, I guess is that the QR code?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, and I
Okay.
always get a kick out of like when if you go into a security conference and some vendor has some of those to hand out and everybody's just kind of joking like, yeah, okay, like I'm gonna take this and put it, really, and they're a
Exactly.
legitimate vendor. They're not gonna do something stupid with your computer, but not a single person in that room trusts that
I
device. So
know. It's so
go to the
funny.
same thing with QR codes. Go to a security conference, somebody's got a QR code up on the screen. I'm like, I'm not doing that. I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
you're like, where is this taking me? I guess I'm like conditioned by the menus at the restaurants these days, where I'm just like, "Ah,
Yeah, that's fair.
that's
Yeah,
fair,
that's fair.
right?" So, I mean, so what about that? Do you really think that that some of these tools should start to be implemented more? I think about these tools now where I'm like, maybe these are part of the solution. Like the cloud access security brokers. It's like, wait a minute, I only want you to have access to our internal OpenAI instance in Azure.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to block everything else that looks like that. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know. I feel like companies are still not that technically mature.
Yeah, and look, I could go on for a long time about zero trust. It's been a big, focus of ours, especially recently. The first thing that comes to mind is, ironically, having some AI tools that are going to help us with finding that, because I think really, when we go back to sort of the origins of AI, because I think we often talk about AI, but more often than not, we're just talking about these large language models. But AI, back from its existence with machine learning and those sort of things, was really just being able to take large amounts of data that's very hard for humans to go through
Hmm.
and find patterns,
Hmm.
find different issues, right? I mean, the amazing things are using machine learning, these sort of things, to find cancer cells
I was
in
going to say, like, genetics is the
x-rays.
best
Yeah.
example of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think what's most likely going to happen is, from what I've heard of really good examples of AI being used in larger businesses are, and this is a little bit of an aside, but it's related. So follow me for a moment. But,
Hmm.
taking disparate data sets, normally you would have to normalize that data so that, the database could read that information more freely. You don't need to do that as much with the large language models. The large language models can understand that stuff a little bit better. And so you can use it to do things like find trends in data without having to normalize that data.
Hmm.
And I think you could use it to do things like, hey, tell me where my permissions suck. And instead of having to go through and manually, look at
Smart.
permissions or use tools that are, bringing up what the permissions are, you have a method of saying, here's what the permissions should be. Can you tell me where it's not that? And I
I
think that's,
love
some
that
interesting,
example. That's an awesome example because it's easy to double check. It's easy to make sure that the AI is telling you the right thing, right? Because you could just go look at the permissions. That's easy.
yeah. And I think what's,
To validate what you're learning, right? Because that's another problem with AI is the validation piece. And that was kind of the programming example. If you're not validating as it's creating, are you just introducing a bug later on?
yeah, it's the hallucination. And that's
Yeah.
where it's, can you help me make a decision rather than can you make a decision for me?
Hmm.
Unless I
Hmm.
don't really care if you make a poor decision every once in a while. But I think, and to kind of follow this example, of, where I've heard of it being used, there's a lot of great ways to start getting proactive information on things. I was listening to an IT leader talking about how they were leveraging these large language models and some machine learning for their network operations center. This was
I love
reasonably
that.
sized ISP. And what they were doing was they weren't asking the AI to go fix problems. They were asking the AI to look for trends where problems would then come, right? So if it saw, hey, the last several times that this switch had this issue and ended up crashing, we see signs of that issue coming. Go do this thing on this switch, keep it from crashing. And I think
Beautiful.
that's, some pretty powerful functionality, but that's really in like being able to take the data that you have and, make proactive decisions with that data.
It's like the next level of monitoring and alerting is the trend
Absolutely.
analysis piece of it, right? Because we always talk about that. You can monitor everything.
Mm.
You can alert on everything. So what do we need to be alerting on, right? Only things that are going to bring something down is the way that I like to think about it. Like I don't want an alert if everything's good. I only want alerts if it's bad, right? And so I love that example too. And I feel let me stick to this train of thought first. But I think that's an excellent way of kind of saying, look, this is going to help us get even better because it's analyzing trends that your knock person doesn't have to. Right? It's like maybe you have a brand new knock person. They haven't been around for the 3 times that it's happened previously. And so I think these are really good examples of
Yeah.
how to leverage these tools to be more productive and secure at the same time.
Yeah, I think there was a phrase that somebody had said at this recent leadership conference that I really liked. I wrote it down because I really liked it. And it was, because I think we're in this interesting era where so many companies have been having AI replace jobs. Now, of course, I don't want to get into the skies falling sort of thing on that because I think a lot of these tech companies that are doing that, they also way overhired during COVID. So a lot of their cuts are just right sizing anyway. But I think, there's a legitimate concern some people have for, what AI is doing for jobs. And I think what the good companies are doing is they're saying use AI for transactional stuff to allow the humans to do transformational stuff.
I love it.
Right. So that's exactly that example, right? I don't need somebody peering through hundreds of logs to see if they can find a trend with this firewall that goes down once every 6 months. We can use AI to do that. But I'm definitely going to have somebody, person, going to make the change that's going to resolve that issue going forward. And that is a little bit transactional, but it is also just, hey, long term, it's freeing up their time to say, hey, resetting these things up right in the first place. Is there a way we could do this a little differently to keep these kinds of issues from happening again?
Again, that's like one of those foundational basic examples. Like, are we even setting up our servers the same way every single time?
Mm,
Are we doing the hardening that we think we're supposed to be doing? Are we able to validate? This is a good example of one that we use. We do like quarterly or monthly security reviews for our clients. And it's like, well, we have to still put eyes on it, even though we think we set it up right. Did we? And so
sure.
those are these examples that I feel like this is where I feel like we should be talking, as not this transformational what if, like if we all had crystal balls, is it just going to be one person managing 30 agents? And like that's way beyond where we should be thinking. I love these examples, right? Trend analysis, permissions, like review, the categorization. What other ones have you come up with that are like that? I mean, this should be the topic, right, of this conversation. I feel like we'll have to do follow up.
Yeah, it's a lot of the fun in it. And, before I get to some of those examples, I think this is where I also want to come back to this idea of AI standardization and, getting your teams in the same tools because, look, I think I've had some good ideas, but I'd much rather hear ideas from everybody else, the ones that are doing the work all the time. Like, hey, this kind of sucks doing this over and over and over again. Is this something we can do with AI? And, maybe it is. Maybe it's something we just do as a basic automation. I mean, I don't need to overcomplicate it by putting AI in there if it doesn't belong in there, which is why we've talked about this. And I want to say, like, think about the automation first. Does the AI fit as a tool that helps us make this automation? Is it necessary? But I think as the sort of idea train has been coming along, the big one I've been thinking about trying to figure out, and I think the challenge with this is a little bit programmatic, And there's also obviously security concerns. And there's great, places like Azure and AWS both have ways to work with models on data, keeping it private, but like connecting things like, hey, can we connect our documentation platform, our ticketing system, our SharePoint? And can we make it to where we have an AI agent that sits in our Microsoft Teams where a service desk person can go, hey, I've got this issue for this customer. I don't really know how to solve it. Can you give me whatever I need from our documentation to help me solve this issue?
Love that.
And now it's going across different platforms. It's looking at ticket data, see if we've done this before. And it's, allowing us to find that data, but then also interact with it like you're interacting with a team member. And I think, I don't think this is a new idea, but where I started thinking about this was, and just the trends of that we're finding things like, hey, Gen Z's not really Google searching things anymore. They're using, Chat GPT to find their answers.
Yeah.
And really, I'm sure all of us have seen this too. You get the AI summary whenever you Google something anymore, and half of us are just reading that and moving on with our lives.
Yeah.
So it's really just this idea of like, I don't want to go search for this thing anymore. Let me ask this tool to find it for me. But now across multiple tools.
What's funny about that is that's a smallish, transactional example that has transformative impact. Because when you think about like what we ask our team to do, it's like, okay, look at the past. I mean, you just talked about this, but I want to get really specific here. It's look at the tickets from this user in the past and have they already had this issue? Look at our knowledge base, look at our, our management tools to find out like how the computer's been performing. Like you could really like that stuff is like could be an hour of someone's time. And again, my goal is not to make everybody so productive that we don't need them. It's like, let me make your job easier so that, it doesn't feel like such a heavy load. Because I know that these, service desk jobs are probably, in my opinion, the hardest in IT. Dealing with our customers is really hard. And they have, it's almost like I feel like people get compassion fatigue from doing service desk. Legitimately,
Sure.
right? And so that example just got me really excited. I'm like, well, when are you doing that, Bryan? That's really the question.
Well, we're working on it. We really are. I would love to see something like that happen because, again, I think it is that same idea of where can we save somebody time to where they can, allow themselves to start working on some of this transformative stuff. I mean, I came up from the service desk.
Yep.
I know how tough that is. And I was willing to spend a lot of my free time skilling up so that I could move to the harder problems, but the harder problems are the more interesting ones, right? That's the ones we actually want to work on. That's the stuff that we're here for. And so if we can give you some time to be able to spend a little bit more of your time working on harder issues and getting better at your
learning
job.
Yep.
Yeah.
Learning something new. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Exactly. But I think, what also came to mind in all this too, is we're thinking like, how can we extend this, right? Because you in ChatGPT's business platform, and I think with the free one too, but I haven't been in the free one for a while because like we said, I like to use Claude.
Yeah.
But you can set up your own GPTs. And, again, this could be another agent. So you could have an agent communicating with that system that's maybe they're set up to be an expert in Microsoft 365. So if you have a question, you can ask a question to this thing. And I think what it comes around to, and this is what I was wanting to get to, is context is everything in these tools. And so if I could
say more about context being everything.
Yeah. So
you're right.
If I could give suggestions on this to anybody, I think where I've found the most power in these tools is providing better context in your prompts. That's why, a lot of people talk about prompt engineering and this idea of like, if you can be more specific in your prompts, you can get more data. And I think the way to think about it is like, hey, if you got a large language model and its scope is massive, and then you walk in and you say, hey, you're an expert in Microsoft 365, it shrinks its scope.
I love
it becomes
that.
a little better, right? But the way that I really like to do this, and I guess I can give an example. We were talking about job descriptions earlier. ChatGPT, Claude, these tools, they all have project functionality, which lets you put multiple files in, have different chats that are interweaving, connected. You could even have your team members jump in and have different chats related to this project. What I did was I went and I found 5 or 6 job descriptions out on the web that really kind of fit mostly what we were looking for, right? They're all just a little different. I put those in to the project. And I have a lot of extra context around what we do through Claude, because Claude can see across different chats. And so I have a lot of other context. Obviously, I sanitize the heck out of anything that's going in there.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of context about what we do.
Mm-hmm.
So I say, okay, here are a bunch of other job descriptions. Based on that, based on the context you know about what we do already, ask me questions until we have enough information to create that first draft of the job description. One at a time, right? Because AI loves to drop 100 questions on you, and you're like, okay, which one do I answer first?
Yeah.
Ask me questions one at a time. And they'll ask you questions.
I love that.
Okay.
Yeah.
We see all of this across this one. What are you trying to do with X, Y, and Z? And you can say, okay, I'm trying to do this, this, and this. Okay, next question. And then it gives you, that answer at the end. And then what was been really cool was, hey, we hear a lot about HR teams trying to use platforms to weed out candidates that are not as strong.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great, but they're often missing so much of that context. And so you could be turning somebody away that could be great, but they're missing that context. In that project, I have all the context in the world. So if I start putting resumes in there and I say, hey, compare this to what we've been talking about, what's our strengths and what's our weaknesses?
So smart.
It's unbelievable how much you can get done in that realm. But it's all about that context. If I didn't have that context, the results that I would get on that would be so much weaker. And oftentimes you'll find, if you know what you're doing and you're trying to get something done with AI and you haven't provided that context and gives you terrible answers and you go, that's a terrible answer, I don't want to do this anymore, and you move on.
Well, and what's so funny, and I chuckled to myself when you said like HR people go through resumes, and there's always been this kind of discussion about, do we need technical people reviewing technical resumes? Because just because you put all your buzzwords on a resume doesn't make you technical, is problem one. And just like you said, what if you put some stuff that they're not comparing against it? So I love that example, because then you almost make the recruiting arm of your company that much stronger, right? If you had somebody like you, Bryan, in every manager had the skill set that you just described about having the context, about writing the job descriptions, and then being able to compare resumes, that would make people would get the jobs that they really need and want. Versus like you hire somebody and it takes 6 months to figure out if they are the right fit.
Sure.
And that's not fun for anybody, by the way. We all know that's not fun. No. So I love that example. I guess I kind of feel like for this discussion, we just need to wrap it up a little bit in terms of kind of the tips that I think we've come up with and that you've shared so far. So, I mean, I love that quote. It was transactional, not transformational, right? That's one thing. Context was another one. Give it the context that it needs. Don't ask it to boil the ocean for you, the tools. Definitely jump in or tell me if I'm forgetting them. But my favorite one, I think, was keep it simple. Like think about those processes that you're doing that take time and try to automate those things, i.e. ticket categorization. What am I missing? Because I feel like this is like, we need to do a blog on this now. You're so lucky that we get to work together, because now I'm like, oh, we're going to do all this. But what are some of the other ones I forgot, and just kind of summarizing, or is that good? I don't, we can leave it at that.
So the ones that come to mind immediately are AI standardization.
Okay.
Right? Pick a tool, get your team in that tool, start training them on that tool, learn the best ways to use that tool, and make sure that everybody's using it. The next is, and that's something that you can do no matter how good or bad your processes are. Right? But if you don't have great processes, work on those processes before you introduce AI into the chain of working with those processes.
That's a good one.
Here's a pro tip. Use the AI to help you write the process.
I was going to say the tool can help you with that too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Remember, ask me questions one at a time. Very powerful way to build out your prompt without having to think about, what should this prompt look like? And let me write a 3-paragraph essay for what my prompt should be. No, just ask me questions. Let's work on it together.
Sanitize the data.
Sanitize the data. That's the first step I take. If I ever have anything that could potentially have data in it, and look, that's as simple as customer names. I don't want customer names in anything I'm putting in there. So
I was going to say, when you talk about sanitizing, what are you talking about?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously the biggest step is if there's anything sensitive in there at all, what we like to call personal identifiable information, PII.
That's a good one.
Make sure that's not in there, right? No social security numbers, no addresses, no phone numbers. But I'll go a next step. I don't really want you knowing anything about me that's that personal. So no customer names, no
Yep.
company names, no
Yep.
specific people, no IP addresses, no computers. That stuff's all getting pulled out and it's getting
I love
replaced
it.
with customer name or x.x.x.x.x. So
Hmm.
take anything out that could even possibly identify what you're doing.
Hmm.
Again, this is hopefully a little bit less important if you're using a professional product like ChatGPT for business or
Yep.
enterprise, where they specifically state at the bottom their chats are not training on your data, or they're not training on your chats.
Yep.
Again,
Yep.
take that with a grain of salt. Who knows what they're doing really internally.
I mean,
Um,
yeah, that's a whole other
Definitely don't
topic.
do that if you're using the free versions of ChatGPT, though. I mean, just go back
That
and look
might
what
be
happened
another good
to
one.
Samsung,
Yeah.
right?
What
When they had
happened?
one
Tell
of
people.
their, well, and forgive me if I'm remembering this. This was something that I read some time back, and it could have been Samsung, could have been anybody else. The lesson is the same. They had an engineer that put their whole code base in the free version of ChatGPT,
Yep.
and because it was training on that, people could ask it questions about their code base, and it would bring it up. Big data leak. Don't
Bummer.
do that.
Don't
don't
do
don't
that.
do that.
Don't do that. And I guess we'll end with this. So we I think we should absolutely follow up on some of this with like a best practices on AI. That feels really encouraging because I think a lot of our customers are wondering what those best practices are too. But I think that a big takeaway is keep it simple, keep it small, keep it secure, and don't treat it like the Wild West. Treat it like a project that you've been doing before. Like treat it like any other project, and you'll figure out these use cases. Because I mean, you've been playing with this probably for the last 3 years, and I think for me, even talking to you, I'm like, that's just that thinking of let's start smaller has been, I think, a real win. So that's probably my biggest takeaway is start small. So thank you so much for joining me today. It's such a treat to talk to one of our team members, and I definitely am going to have you on again.
Thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Yay.